Arlene Blum, amerykańska alpinistka, pisarka, publicystka i naukowczyni. W 1970 roku poprowadziła pierwszą kobiecą wyprawę na Denali, czyli najwyższy szczyt Ameryki Północnej. W 1978 roku zorganizowała i poprowadziła pierwszą kobiecą wyprawę na jeden z najtrudniejszych ośmiotysięczników, Annapurnę. I było to pionierskie przedsięwzięcie. Jako pierwsza Amerykanka przeszła wielki szlak himalajski w Bhutanie, Nepalu i Indiach oraz całą długość Alp, niosąc na plecach swoją małą córeczkę. Arlene Blum jest obecnie profesorką na Wydziale Chemii na Uniwersytecie Kalifornijskim w Berkeley oraz dyrektorką Green Science Policy Institute, organizacji, która łączy przedstawicieli rządów, przemysłu, naukowców oraz obywateli na całym świecie na rzecz wspierania polityki prowadzonej w obszarze chemii, ochrony zdrowia człowieka i środowiska naturalnego. Została wyróżniona między innymi przez brytyjski The Guardian jako jedna ze 100 najbardziej inspirujących kobiet świata, a przez National Women History Project uznana za jedną ze 100 kobiet liderek walczących o ratowanie naszej planety. Jest też autorką książki Annapurna, Góra kobiet, która przez National Geographic Adventure Magazine została zaliczona do 100 najlepszych książek przygodowych wszechczasów.
The interview is because this year is the 45th anniversary of the first woman expedition on Annapurna. So I thought that it's a great opportunity to talk about women in the mountains and to talk with you about your perspective from now to the past. So maybe first let's go back to Annapurna and the first women's expeditions in general, because like we know from your book, perfect, great book, that time in the 70s, all the 8,000 meter peaks had been climbed by men only. And first question is why women had never climbed earlier the 8,000 meter peak in your opinion, and what decided, what was the moment that you thought that it's time for a woman?
Well, I think women had climbed lower peaks, and actually in the 50s, Claude Cogan, a French woman climber, had organized a women's expedition to Choy-Oyu. I don't know if you've heard of that. And they were struck by an avalanche, and that was and several of them died, and that was very discouraging. So this idea first arose actually in Afghanistan at about more than 7,000 meters. And it came from Vanda. How do you pronounce it? Vanda
Rutkiewicz in Noshak. Yes.
Yeah, Noshak. So this was her first 7,000 meter peak, I think. And she was coming down from the summit. I was heading up. And we had been talking about women's expeditions. And at that point, as you said, all the 8,000 meter peaks had been climbed by men, but no woman had climbed 8,000 meters. And so Vanda was very happy. She was coming down. I was going up. She gave me a big hug and said, we must climb together, all women, to Annapurna. So that's where the idea first arose. And it came from Vanda.
In your book, we can find the information about Denali, for example, that women could take part in the expedition only to help with cooking, and women aren't physically strong enough and emotionally stable enough to climb mountain like Denali, so you couldn't go on Denali with the men expedition, and you decided to go with women's expedition. What did you feel when you read this note, this information this time?
Well, it didn't sound accurate because, I had already climbed higher than Denali in the Andes, but I was the only woman on the team. And I will say that this was 1970. And a lot of people, including women, just thought women weren't strong enough because to go to Denali, you had to carry 30 days of food. And it was heavy, 1.5 kilos a day of food. all the heavy gear. So everybody had like 30 kilos of things, or more than that, to carry. And I'm sorry, not 30, like 200 pounds. So that's, I don't know, like 80 kilos, a lot. And we had to do many carries. In those days, people hadn't thought of pulling things on sleds like they do now. So we were really having to carry very heavy loads. And so we weren't really sure. It was like a great adventure. Every step of the way, we were like, wow, here we are on Denali. Oh gosh, we've got Camp 1. So it was very exciting because there actually was a big history of women doing things. But at that time, we didn't know it. So we felt like real pioneers. And we did climb Denali, and we had our leader, unfortunately, had altitude issues and became unconscious just below the summit. And we had to do a really difficult rescue getting her down the mountain. And we did. And so, it built our confidence that women, of course, women can climb high mountains.
Yes. And after that, you choose Annapurna. And why? Why Annapurna?
Well, Vanda suggested it, and it seemed reasonable.
Yes.
It was the first 8,000-meter peak ever climbed. Maurice Herzog led a French expedition in 1950 that climbed it, and it was like the 10th highest, not one of the highest. And
yes, but very difficult. And, it was difficult to organize a women expedition on that difficult, peak. So,
well, we didn't know it was going to be that difficult or dangerous. We thought this was the first one climbed, so maybe it's the easiest and safest. There wasn't enough history. When we went to it, people didn't know how difficult and dangerous it was. So we didn't either. We discovered that it was very, very difficult and very dangerous once we were there.
Yes, and there were many problems and complicated situation. We can read it from your book, but from where did you get so much determination to lead the first women expedition on the higher 8,000-meter peak? What was the most difficult things for all of you? Not only get the money, like we can read in your book, but in the mental way?
Well, actually, I wrote a second book called Breaking Trail that I did a Polish book tour a long time ago when Annapurna came out in Polish. And I said, I hope you'll translate my other book into Polish, but they haven't.
And it's
yet.
not, yes.
Yeah, because my other book really describes I had a very difficult childhood, and I had to really push to do anything. Like when I was 10 years old, to be able to take swimming lessons, I had to really, really push my family. So I kind of got the habit of trying very hard to do things. And I always have, the work I do now is on harmful chemicals, and a lot of the things we do stopping the use of harmful chemicals, people say is absolutely impossible. So I guess my whole life, I've often had a picture of a mountain summit or a way for the world to be better. And once I get that picture, I try to find a team, and together we solve the problem or climb the mountain. So that's kind of how I've been my whole life. And now I do it with using science to stop harmful chemicals. It's very similar.
Another difficult subject, another difficult things to do in the whole world. Okay, and I'm wondering, what do you think now in today's perspective on all this expedition and all this women subject, women in the mountain? What changed this expedition to Annapurna in general? What do you think?
Well, I've heard from many, many people that the story of Annapurna and our book really encouraged women and men to try to do things that were really hard, that it provided some inspiration. And that makes me very happy, because I think everybody should be able to have a vision of what they want to do. And even if people say it's impossible, to try, because only if you try can you succeed. And so I'm happy that Annapurna provides that inspiration to both men and women.
How do you resolve the experience today in Annapurna and your earlier expeditions, women's expedition?
Well, I think women and men should be able to do whatever they want and should not be limited by the prejudices of society. And I think things are much better for women in the mountains, but still not equal. You know, unfortunately, men still control a lot of the world, but I think times are changing. There's so many, like when I went to graduate school, I went to MIT, which is a technical school, and I was the only woman in all of engineering and physics. Like that was in the 60s. And then my daughter became an engineer, an environmental engineer. And it was kind of funny. She said she was doing summer field work, and the professors, the postdocs, the grad students, everybody was women. And she said, I don't know how you meet guys when you're in environmental engineering.
Wow.
So that's a big change.
Big change. It is a big change. Wow. Yeah. And the good way.
and actually, my daughter, I'm very proud of her. She has a government job where she's like deputy undersecretary for water and science at the Bureau of the Interior. And she sends me pictures of her with the lead scientists from the White House, a number of government agencies, and they're all young women. So that's
great.
Yeah, so
that
very
is
inspiring.
Great information. Yes.
Inspiring. Yeah.
Okay, so if you talk about that, so maybe now I will ask you, what do you think about the different, if there are different, in the mountain, in the high mountain now and earlier, and the woman in the mountain? Is there, you know, better or not? How do you see? How do you look on this high 8,000-meter peak? In Himalayas, all this reaches the top. How do you see it now?
Well, there are a lot more women who do extreme climbing, extreme skiing, you know, who hike up 8,000-meter peaks and ski down. There's several women who do that. It's still more men who choose to do that than women, and I think that's fair enough. You know, I think there are probably more scientists. I think there are more civil engineers are men, but maybe more environmental engineers are women. You know, so women, I think if they want to, they can do whatever they want, but not as many women choose to risk their lives. I mean, Himalayan climbing really is risking your life due to the avalanches, the weather, the severe terrain. And I think maybe women tend not to want to risk their lives as much as men, but plenty do. So things are, I think now it's pretty balanced that women who want to can do really hard things in the mountains, and maybe not as many want to, and that's fine.
But maybe earlier it was more important for women to be in because today it's, more like hobby, and there were bigger idea for the, reach the highest peak. Female expedition was the idea. And now I'm wondering why we don't have the only women expedition, because we don't have.
Well, in Poland, you did have women's expeditions for sure. Are you a climber yourself?
Yes, yeah. I am. And we had, but in Vanda's time earlier. Now we have female and men expedition, and I think that still is less women in the mountain, in the higher mountain, and climbing, mountaineering. Maybe in the rock climbing, there is many girls, many women, but I think that it's still less, and it's not good.
Well, there is still some here too, but it's just a lot better than it was. And as I said, I don't know that high mountain climbing is something that everybody wants to do. That very high mountains do involve risking your life, and sort of traditionally men, going way back, men went out and fought the cave there, and women stayed home and raised the family by the fire. So I think women biologically are less likely to go out and risk their lives as men. but some women want to. And you know, I interviewed a number of major women climbers, including Vanda, and many of the women had very, very tough childhoods. And
Yes.
Vanda certainly did. And so I think women are less likely to want to risk their lives and climb high mountains. And that seems fine. But if a woman wants to, she can. And in my day, the only way a woman could get to go practically was to organize a women's expedition. You know, they often were not welcome on mixed expeditions. But now if they're welcome, then they can just not have to organize their own. You know, the way I did organize a lot of expeditions, and that was one way I got to go, because I wasn't getting invited. You know, it was like there was an American team that went to the Pamirs. You know, you've heard of there was a big international climbing camp where tragically a lot of Russian women died. But the American team, they said we're to include women, and they asked for applications, and all these experienced women applied, and they didn't pick any of us. They picked young women who'd never practically been on snow before.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was sort of, you know, they weren't thinking of them as being serious climbers. So I mean, in those days, like, to go do serious climbing, you sort of had to organize it yourself. It tended not to get included. But now I think women are included if they want to be. But the Poles always, because when I first met Polish climbers on Noszak in 1972, and it was men and women climbing together. You know, right? They drove these great big trucks from Poland with lots of caviar and down to trade. They didn't have any money, but they traded. And they would drive from Poland to the Afghanistan or Nepal and do incredible climbs.
Yes, that was the gold time, you know, in our Himalayas history, women Himalayas history. But you said something about family, and I was wondering, has your acceptance of risk changed after having a baby? And that's why you stopped climbing in the high mountains?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, someone invited me to go on the highest peak in Antarctica. And I would have loved to have done that. I said, oh, but I can't. I'm pregnant. But I said, invite me again when my daughter's 3. I think when she's 3, I'll be able to do that again. But then I never wanted to. I mean, I've always done great adventures. You know, we've traveled all over the world and had wonderful adventures, but never life-threatening things. And I felt, but not, you know, some mothers do life-threatening climbs. But for me, once I was a mother, I didn't want to risk my life. But yet men who are fathers do risk their lives.
Exactly. I wanted to say that's the big difference. Yes, the gender and
like Alison Hargraves, she was a British woman climber who had 2 young children who died on K2, and she was really criticized for leaving her children to climb K2. But that seemed really wrong to me, because so many men have left their children and died in the mountains, and no one criticizes them. You know, so I think women should have the right to make that choice. But a lot of women like me chose not once I was a mom, I just didn't want to risk my life anymore.
Did you think or want in part of your life to back to this women's expedition and to, you know, lead another expedition, or definitely not?
Well, I led several women's I also led a first expedition in India to a quite difficult peak, a women's. So I guess I did 3 major women's expeditions, and I really thought I would do more, but then I really didn't want to anymore. I mean, I still had adventures, you know. As I said, I continue. Yes. I continue. I was just in the Canadian Rockies and found myself going up a very steep, my knees aren't so good. And I found myself going up a very steep slope and thinking, oh gosh, am I going to be able to go down because of my knees? And so, you know, I still kind of, I thought, this is foolish. At my age, I shouldn't be doing this, but I did. So I still feel adventurous, but reasonable adventures. I don't. Also, I think as you get old, so I had a big period, of being a mom. And by the time my daughter went to college, I was a little too old to do Himalayan mountaineering. But I still go trek. I've been to Nepal many times. I go trekking. I do other adventures, and the work I do now gives me a very similar feeling of doing something that seems impossible. And in this case, it makes the whole world healthier. So I feel really lucky to have found something that same feeling of finding a team and doing something. Okay, this is my kitty who wants to be in the interview.
Oh, how sweet. And you were, if I remember well, you were with your child on trekking from Yugoslavia to France. Yes.
Yeah, we trekked from hut to hut across.
It wasn't easy, easy adventures. So.
But safe. No, that was hard work because also, we didn't really know what we needed. So we're carrying, diapers and first aid kits and we kept mailing things back. We had way too much stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So that was an adventure that worked well with a baby. So we tried to find
it's a big challenge today. It is big challenge to, traveling with a baby. And in this time, I can imagine that it was a very big challenge.
Well, nobody had ever seen a baby in these high mountain huts, and people were worried they were going to, get up at 2 a.m. to go climbing. They didn't want the baby to cry and wake them up. But it was. I figured her first summer, all I would do is nurse and change diapers. So I might as well do it in a beautiful place. I'd never been to the Alps, so I got to walk. It was fun.
And do you have contact with girls from Annapurna expedition?
Yeah, we had. Well, until the pandemic, we had regular reunions, and then we kept planning them during the pandemic and not happening. And I think we haven't had one now since before the pandemic, but hopefully we will have another one soon. Margie, who was 20 on Annapurna, because remember, Annapurna was like 45 years ago. So she was 20, and she's a geology professor, and her research is in the Canadian, around Mount Waddington, which is a very challenging mountain in the Coast Range of BC. And so she goes there and, does geology still every summer. But, I think people ski and they go to the mountains, but nobody, we are older. So she was the youngest and she's 65. So a bit old for Himalayan climbing, I think. But not trekking. I hopefully will go to Nepal and go, I was going to go this Christmas, but my daughter's having a baby, so I decided that was a great adventure. But I'll go to Nepal again and go trekking.
Okay. And now I would like to talk about the mountain through women's eyes. That what do you think? What is the difference between climbing with men and women team, if there are any difference, and why and because you choose on more women's expedition? Yes, of course, that was the idea, but
no, I did both. I probably did have my climbing.
So you have good perspective. What if there is any different? Of course,
I think individual differences are more important, and both men and women climbers tend to be very motivated. Maybe women tend to talk things out more. If men aren't agreeing, they often just climb the mountain and don't work it out. Well, I think, I don't know if you ever seen, we had a documentary from Annapurna.
Yes, I saw it.
And there's a scene where we're all talking everything out, and that's what we had, disagreements, and we did. So I think women are more likely to spend more time talking and maybe to care a little more about the relationships. But that's a generalization. Men can care about relationships and talk things out too, but maybe not quite as much. They're more likely to take action.
Yeah, and what do you think, in which things women are better in the mountains? Which women's attributes, traits are good in the mountains?
Well, I think women are good at surviving, you know, so when there's not enough food, somehow women, you know, like the famous Donner Party where they got snowed in and didn't have food for a long time, and women survived better. So I think in real survival situations, perhaps women do a bit better. But again, it's individual. You know, you can't generalize too much, I think.
Okay, and I think we are stronger in mentally way, but not, of course, in general, but it depends. But in general, I think we are, you know, we are stronger mentally way. I would like to ask you if how do you see Wanda? What do you think about Wanda? Did you know her well?
Did you meet her?
No, I couldn't.
You're too young.
Yeah.
So I met her first on Noshak, and then second in Kathmandu. When we climbed Annapurna, she climbed Everest at the same time. Right. So in the book, there's a picture, right, of
Yes.
Irene, Wanda, and me in Nepal. And then the time I knew her best is she came, I invited her to come to Berkeley to do a lecture tour. And she stayed at my house and went to Yosemite. And I think she was here for a couple of weeks. And I interviewed her. I did an oral history of her. So I think those are the 3 times. Oh, and I saw her in the Pamirs.
Wow.
So in the Pamirs, after I was on the team, you know, when the Russian women all died, and Wanda was climbing Peak Communism, which was nearby at the same time with a number of Polish women. And so after the tragedy on Peak Lenin, Wanda came to our base camp. And then the 4th time she came to see me in Berkeley. So I felt also, because I did an oral history, I met a Polish woman who translated. And so Wanda could explain it to her, and she would explain it to me and wrote it all down. So I had this oral history of Wanda.
What do you think, how you saw the Wanda?
Well, that is the thing, that men who are they see a goal, they're aggressive, they go for it. That's a good thing. And women aren't supposed to act that way, you know? And I run into that problem too, because I see a goal and I go for it. And some people don't like that. So I think, you know, men are the ones who are supposed to achieve things like that. And when women do, I mean, I think I write about it in my other book. But like when we wanted our permit for Annapurna, we had to have the American Alpine Club approve us, and they wouldn't approve us with me as the leader. And I had a boyfriend then who was going to Annapurna too. He was British. And the British Alpine Club approved 2 people, very dangerous. They approved them right away. And it took like 6 months for them to approve me. And then I can't remember all of it, but somebody who was on the committee when I was writing my book said it was because I was tall, which is off-putting to men. I had a doctorate, so I was intellectual. I was Jewish. There was anti-Semitism in the climbing world. And I was just outspoken person. I didn't, you know, I wasn't nice and feminine. And yeah, those were the reasons. I write about it in Breaking Trail. I think those were the 4 reasons. And that was kind of a relief to hear those reasons, because I felt there was something wrong with me, that they didn't want me to be the leader of the expedition. And I was really the right person to lead the expedition, you know. Yeah, she was a very strong, determined, amazing person, and very charming. You know, people liked her. She was very thoughtful. I know, it's funny, I have a very cute picture of my daughter. She didn't know if I had a daughter or son, and she brought a beautiful Polish costume for a boy and a girl when she came to see me. And my daughter have wonderful pictures of her when she was like 2 in this beautiful Polish costume that Wanda brought. You know, she was very kind and gracious.
Wow, that was
But she
nice.
was also very determined. And maybe she cared more about her goal than keeping everyone happy. You know what I mean? Women are supposed to keep everyone happy, and men are allowed to go for their goal.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that it was necessary that she had to be determined, because if not, probably she couldn't do everything like
Right.
that in this time, at that time, because now it's easier.
She was so determined. I remember how she was going on an expedition, right, to the Karakoram, and she broke her leg, I think, and she went anyway. You know,
Yes,
just
okay, too.
she just pushed through everything to do what she wanted to do. So people didn't necessarily like that, who weren't as determined as she was. So.
True.
Well, it's good that you're doing what you're doing with your foundation. That's funny. I was in Spain for a meeting, and then I was invited on this Polish book tour. And then I got invited to go to Israel to help them fight the flame retardant industry. The Israeli Ministry of Health invited me to come. So I flew from Warsaw to Tel Aviv, which is not very far. And it was very sad for me because my father was German and his parents all died in Auschwitz.
Oh, okay.
And that is where to go to the Tatras. I'm forgetting the name of the town. It's the town where Auschwitz is.
Krakow.
Krakow, right. So I flew from Spain to Krakow, and I didn't even realize. I saw, you know, at the airport, all these things about Auschwitz, where my grandparents and my whole father's family had died. So it was really strange. So I did a little walking tour of Krakow, where I saw all the synagogues and the pictures of the Jews being taken away by the Nazis. And there were pictures of, you know, then I went to Warsaw, and then I flew from Warsaw to Tel Aviv, which is like a 2-hour flight or something, which was so crazy, thinking the people in the Warsaw Ghetto.
So thank you very much for your time and that you wanted to make the interview with me, and it was inspiring very, very much. And
well, you're welcome. Thank you for keeping Vanda's achievements as an inspiration alive. So thank you for doing that. Very nice talking to you, and the best of luck in what you're doing. So
thank you very much, and have a good sleep.
Thank you. Yeah. Good night. Thanks for getting up so early.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.